As we all know, however, too often congressional investigations are partisan political theater, which is an abdication of duty and an insult to the American people. This committee justified its subpoena to me based on its assumption that I have information regarding the investigations into the criminal activities of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Let me be as clear as I can. I do not.
Welcome to the Political Junkie Substack. We started with a clip from Hillary Clinton's deposition before the House Oversight Committee on February 26, 2026. That's going to be our news focus for today. This is the Clinton Derangement Syndrome episode, and I'm Claire Potter.
I'm Neil Young.
And we're going to begin with the news roundup. Neil, we've got to begin with the war. The big news this week is the Trump administration, minus congressional authorization or any kind of explanation, initiated a war with Iran in partnership with Israel. Now, listeners, we posted a timeline of the conflict on the show notes, so you can take a look at that if you are interested in what brought us here. But honestly, the issues that triggered Donald Trump's decision to suddenly attack the Islamic Republic are not clear to anyone, even the best informed people, right, Neil?
Not at all. I mean, this is sort of a mess in terms of parsing motivation here, strategy, strategic thinking, policy goals. I mean, not policy goals, but sort of geopolitical goals, in part because like the Trump administration hasn't really defended it or explained it, and when they do speak about it, there's a lot of contradicting explanations, right? I mean, Trump seems a little bit, when he speaks about it, seems a little bit stuck on this imminent threat of a Iranian attack on the U.S., but other folks are not saying that when they speak about that in the administration. So a lot of incoherence, which I think is not surprising at all when it comes to the Trump administration, but feels particularly dangerous and scary when this is what we're talking about, war in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, Neil, you and I have talked before about how the Trump administration eschews certain kinds of rituals, political rituals that we've gotten used to as a public. We talked about how when Renee Good and Alex Preddy were shot in Minneapolis, nobody in Washington got up and said, this is so regrettable, we're going to look into it. Similarly, we're really used as a nation to have the president go on television and lay out some evidence for an imminent attack or why the United States has put a significant number of lives and a lot of national treasure in danger and a lot of civilians on the ground in Iran. There's so much to talk about here, and maybe we'll do a later episode on the war when things are clearer, but there's absolutely no rationale for this aggression, right?
Yeah, and the administration has even acknowledged that there wasn't evidence that, or that they can't produce or provide evidence of this, impending attack. And in some ways, it sort of is surprising that this administration that seems willing to sort of make anything up wouldn't sort of concoct something here, but that have actually admitted that they didn't have any evidence to produce around that. And now some of the language has shifted to, well, it wasn't necessarily an imminent attack as much as it's a sort of an existential threat. Well, okay, but that's a very different thing. And if it's an existential threat, that seems all the more reason that you go through the proper procedures of, how an attack is launched and how war is waged. But this administration doesn't care about proper procedures. And I think this sort of thumbing their nose in the face of political convention is like an ongoing theme of this administration, but like it becomes again especially pointed in moments when it seems almost indifferent to the American lives that have been lost so far. I mean, turning that into condemning the media for reporting on it, for example, as opposed to, a normal president solemnly commenting on that and going through the rituals of loss and mourning that you sort of expect around things like this. Also, also Americans are being abandoned in the Middle East, right? They've been told to pack up and get out of there, but like, best of luck to you. So like, there's just so many ways in addition to just like this attack not being explained that only underscore, I think, that how hastily this was done.
Yes, and Trump, and since you and I are all about the DEI, Neil, may I say that had we had a female president who went in front of a camera and said, well, I just had a feeling they were going to attack. I mean, seriously, not to mention, as you're saying, 100,000 or more Americans that were simply abandoned. The administration seemed to have no idea that Iran was going to start lobbing missiles at various bases in the region, at hotels, at buildings that are owned by American universities. I mean, this seems perfectly obvious that they might do something like that, but they seem not to understand that. I think the other thing that is really troubling to me, and this is a really post-October 7th phenomenon, I think, is it seems like Americans and even the American media has grown so insensitive to the death of civilians.
Yeah.
I mean, on the first day of this war, I believe an American missile hit a building in Tehran and instantly killed, I hope it was instant, about 175 girls who were going to school next door. And this has just been brushed over and over again. The administration says, oh, yeah, we're going to look into it. But Americans really don't seem to care anymore about the death of civilians. It's just a data point.
Yeah, I mean, this is a country that almost daily gets news of gun massacres in this country, gun violence. We're so inured to the violence around us, and I think a lot of folks, for various reasons, sort of tune out to all those things. But I think this is an administration that particularly sort of depends on that and benefits from that. I mean, there's clearly no military plan here. This is a fly by the seat of their pants operation, and that is just, again, so alarming. That's not what you do when you launch missiles into the Middle East. There's also all this religious rhetoric that's coming out that we're learning about, like a lot of through the Pentagon and through apparently military commanders are telling soldiers that they are involved in a holy war, that this is about bringing about the end. Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole segment on this, and maybe we will, so perhaps we should pause, but like, this is a mess, and it's not good.
Yeah, I was walking the dog the other day, and I smelled sulfur, and I thought, oh my God, is the Antichrist really walking the earth? I was also thinking about the level to which this, as you're saying, they're flying by the seat of their pants, but it seems like none of our allies in the region were notified that this was going to happen. And the transformation from having the United States part of a network of carefully calibrated, carefully coordinated allies around the world, and now I think it's the United States and Israel, and that is such a shift in world politics. I can't even wrap my head around it.
Completely. And it doesn't make any of us safer, and it certainly doesn't, I think, aid global stability at all.
Right. Meanwhile, all of those oil and gas tankers are all lined up trying to get in and out of the Straits of Hormuz, just sitting there like duckies. Price of oil is going up. Unemployment figures are also going up in the United States. Apparently, we're down 90,000 jobs, and oil is now up over $80 a barrel. So whatever weaknesses in the economy existed before this war are exacerbated now. So, Neil, in related news, the cracks in the MAGA coalition are predictably widening because of this war. We've talked about this sort of fragmentation before on this show, but we're beginning to see a major fault line emerge around the war because, of course, MAGA literally meant make America great again by making America first. And the inability to explain what we are doing in a foreign adventure, why and how it's ever supposed to end, has caused a number of discontented MAGA influencers to really sort of erupt. Now, some of them are also supporting the president. So could you sketch that for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, it's really sort of people are going in different directions, and I think people are making different strategic choices for their own, I don't know, I guess the way they position themselves in this, bizarre far right media verse. But you have, someone like Laura Loomer, who we've talked about on here before, this far right influencer who really apparently can pick up the phone and Trump will answer it. Not surprisingly, she's leapt to the defense of Trump in this engagement. But then you have, Nick Fuentes, the Groyper. I mean, what else could we say about him? Lots of things. But he announced on Twitter that he was going to be voting for Democrats in 2026 because he said Trump had broken all his promises.
Yay.
Yeah. I guess you're paying attention.
Woo!
And any votes help, I suppose. Candace Owens, not surprisingly, because it's the direction she's been going in for a good year now, is blaming everything on Israel and sort of spinning Israel conspiracies there. You just sort of see people like running to whatever ground I think that they think is most promising for them and their sort of media future, their media careers.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we've got Ann Coulter, who, I was thinking nobody really cares about Ann Coulter anymore.
Yeah.
That her marginalization from cable television has really meant she's speaking to a very, very niche audience. I think she's on Substack. She's got a podcast. But of course, Ann Coulter had sort of come back around to supporting Trump because of the deportation agenda. She has now flipped again and said, this is absurd. Why are we doing this? Megyn Kelly, which I'm not sure I would have called that one. Megyn Kelly has come out against the war, and Tucker Carlson, who has become a raging anti-Semite, has also come out against the war. What is Trump's response to all of this?
I mean, he's basically, not surprisingly, Trump has a sort of consistent record when it comes to people who, show any sign of disagreement with him. He's throwing them all under the bus, attacking them, saying Megyn Kelly should pick up a history book, LOL. I think, sort of saying Tucker Carlson, that he doesn't pay him any attention. And, the typical insults that Trump gives to anyone who shows any voice of opposition, even those quite close to him. And I think what's really interesting is because part of this is about like all of them saying this isn't what MAGA is. Like this isn't what MAGA is supposed to be. And Trump's response has been MAGA is what I say it is. And I think that is one of those moments where this guy has his finger exactly on the pulse of what has, fueled his political rise, to mix some metaphors there. But MAGA is what I say it is. I mean, isn't there something sort of just like baldly true about what he's declaring there?
I think that's true, Neil. I would also say that it points out something else, which is MAGA has always been an empty vessel waiting to be filled with whatever is working for Trump at the time. So despite the fact that we associate all kinds of right-wing populist agendas with MAGA, like anti-immigration, low taxes, anti-war, what those things really are a bunch of tendencies on the right wing of the Republican Party that MAGA manages to stitch together every once in a while to make something happen, like elect Donald Trump. But there's never been a MAGA philosophy in which somebody said, MAGA is blah, 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 blah. So on a certain level, I think Trump is speaking the truth when he says MAGA is me. I am MAGA. If I say this is MAGA, then it's MAGA. And of course, it's easy if you are into superficial explanations for everything, which he is, and the people who work for him are. It's very easy to just say, well, this is how I'm putting America first.
Right.
There are a range of reasons why a demilitarized Iran and a de-radicalized Iran would be a good thing. I mean, for the Iranian people, it would be a good thing. I don't think Iranian society, as it is currently being run by a theocratic state, is anything anyone would defend. That being said, it is not good for the United States to go into senseless wars that it can't get out of that ruin its moral standing around the world. It's also not a good idea to have all of this stuff swirling around about whether it is Trump who decided to go to war or whether it was Netanyahu who decided to go to war and Trump had to do it with him. I mean, there's all kinds of concerns about how that fuels anti-Semitic conspiracy theories to say, well, this is all Netanyahu.
Mm-hmm.
But without any better explanation for why the United States and Israel have joined together. There's no list of grievances that's been presented. And when they are, they make no sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So, all right. Well, since you and I are left with trying to make America great again all by ourselves, let's get to the other political news. War or no war, the midterms are still coming. And on primary day last week, we saw some interesting outcomes with incumbents in both parties either struggling to win their elections. I think there are some primaries that are still being recounted or being knocked off entirely. We're seeing a real anti-incumbency streak here in both parties. But Democrats continue to do well. Tell us about some of the Democrats that we are interested in.
Well, I think especially this race in North Carolina for Senate. Roy Cooper, two-time Democratic governor of North Carolina, he had a big win in his primary, and I think that's setting up a really interesting race with the Republican, whose name I believe is Wheatley, endorsed by Trump. I mean, a purple state where I think a ton of money is going to be poured into. And I think like everything right now is showing it a very even race. So it'll be interesting to see that. Also, Texas, I think we talked about Texas just last week and that really fascinating race between James Tallarico and Jasmine Crockett on the Democratic side. Tallarico won like pretty easily. And I actually was surprised by that. I think that, I don't even remember the numbers we were looking at the previous week. I think, there were some polls showing he was up, but a lot of them showed Crockett was winning. So anyway, it's interesting. And I know there was a lot of issues with just voting accessibility in Texas, but, Crockett conceded that race. Tallarico looks in good position to face whoever he might face in the Republican side, which is still up in the air because John Cornyn, the incumbent, has to go to a runoff with Attorney General Ken Paxton, which we predicted last week was going to happen. I think Cornyn's going to lose that race to Paxton, even though I think his numbers were a little ahead of Paxton in the primary, but there was a third-party candidate who had a decent chunk of votes. It feels like in a face-to-face. I don't know. We'll see. What do you have any feelings about that face-off in the Republican side in Texas?
Well, I do, Neil. I think you're right. I think Paxton's going to win. And I think that for two reasons. One is Trump has now jumped in to endorse John Cornyn. And I don't think that's going to go over well in Texas because John Cornyn is not MAGA. He's very conservative. He is no friend of ours, certainly no friend of the gays, but he is also not MAGA. And he is presenting himself as the sane choice and the moral choice. I also think that runoffs like primaries, and perhaps even more so, really reward outsiders. The motivated voters vote in runoffs. If you have already voted and 6 weeks later you're supposed to go down and vote again, I don't think the Cornyn people are going to be motivated the way the Paxton people are. So I think there's that. The Tallarico win did surprise me. I actually thought it would be closer than it was, and I thought Crockett had a really good chance to win. That being said, I think a Tallarico-Paxton election in November, that's a really interesting one. Paxton does have one advantage, which is name recognition, and he has won a statewide race before. Tallarico has not won a statewide race before. So apparently, if I'm reading the Twitter tea leaves properly, they're throwing a lot of stuff at Tallarico about gender. I think there's a lot of insinuation that he's gay. What do we know about that, Neil?
Well, he's not married, and he's in, I believe, his mid-30s. And so, I just think it's easy to insinuate, right? And to sort of let that do its work. And, I think he's been sort of consistently outspoken may be too strong a word, but I think he has a consistently supportive record about LGBTQ issues. And so that coupled with his maybe, mysterious biography, or at least unclear sort of relationship or sexuality status, all those things that, it makes for easy, dirty politics, I think. And so I imagine that'll get going. But something that interests me here, though, is I agree that the Trump endorsement of Cornyn feels like something that causes a backfire here in Texas, right? Like MAGA is insurgency vibes, right? It didn't coalesce. It didn't bring itself about to, just vote for incumbents. It was to tear it all down. And so I think that doesn't help Cornyn. And I also just think there's like energy behind Paxton that like you don't feel with a sort of, two-time senator, or how many times he's been a senator, like running for re-election again. But Tallarico facing Paxton feels like a different race than Tallarico facing Cornyn. And I think like those two different races, for me, in my opinion, would animate independents differently. I mean, I sort of see Tallarico versus Cornyn. It's like two sort of bland white guy establishment types, whereas Paxton, this like just flamethrower, burn it all down type against Tallarico. Like Tallarico feels like somebody in that scenario who represents sort of the sensible, moderate that a lot of maybe suburban whites could sort of get behind and vote for. I still think it's hard for a Democrat to win a statewide election in Texas, but I wonder if it becomes a much closer race if Paxton is the person that Tallarico is facing as opposed to Cornyn.
I totally agree. Now, it's been 40 years since Texas has elected a Democratic senator. So this would be a very big win. One of the things I'm reading in the papers is we Democrats are being reminded how many times we've had our hearts broken in Texas since Ann Richards was governor back in the 1990s. That being said, I think that Paxton survived his impeachment because of his political connections and because of the things that people in the Texas legislature were willing to do for him, and bodies that he knew were buried all over the place. And Texas is exactly that state. And I'm not sure that those things really come into play in a statewide race. I think a statewide race, it's a real toss-up. And I agree with you. If Cornyn is the candidate, then I think Tallarico loses. There's no question in my mind. You just put them side by side, and it's like your wise old dad and your upstart little brother standing next to each other. But it will be worth watching. A ton of outside money is going to flow into the state. I really hope Democratic organizers can restrain themselves from sending out-of-state canvassers and so on into Texas. Texans really don't like that. Nobody really likes it. And so this sense that this really is something for Texans to decide will be an important feature of a successful Tallarico campaign, in my view.
Don't mess with Texas. Let them do their own thing.
Don't mess with Texas. And, I was talking to somebody about Texas the other day who had just been there on a business trip. And Texas is one of those states where, on principle, I detest Texas. And then when I go there, I always have a good time and I always like it. And I always like Texans. So it's one of those states that I would like it to be less homophobic. I would like it to be less cruel. I would like Texas to stop throwing its weight around in national politics. But Texans deserve better than they're getting, I think.
I love Texas in person. It's beautiful. The food is incredible. The people are great. I mean, a lot of them are not, but I agree with you. It's a much more complicated and interesting place, and actually a wonderful place in many ways. And I think it often sort of registers in the political imagination.
Yeah, beautiful place. Okay, so here's our final news item. Yay, on Thursday, Trump fired Ice Barbie. Could it be because she passed the buck to Trump for that $220 million ad campaign that was about herself? So what's she going to do for a living now, Neil?
Well, she's now been, is it special envoy to the shield of the American West or something like that? Am I getting it correct? I mean, it literally just got made up. It sounds like a Harry Potter badge or something. I imagine there's, I don't know, grift corruption and like Congress hasn't actually approved whatever this particular new designation is. She's been given this fancy title just to sort of smooth all this over, correct?
I think that is correct. I think it is your typical soft landing. It's the kind of thing that happens in corporations when you need to get rid of somebody, but you can't just put them on the street. So you put them in a nice corner office and give them no work to do. I believe the job is the Shield of the Western Hemisphere. It sounds like an award that you give to knights or something like that. I don't know what kind of a job that is, but since Kristi Noem didn't know how to be the Secretary of Homeland Security, I guess she could probably run the Shield of the Western Hemisphere too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we'll see what the announcement actually is and what it, what sort of job requirements are listed, but I don't imagine we'll have any more clarity around this position than we do about what's going on in Iran. But I don't know about you, but my phone exploded like literally minutes after this news was announced. All my friend groups like Ice Barbie is out and all the rest, but then it was like within seconds, like what fresh hell is the person that's coming next, right? Like, and I think
Right.
that's
Okay, so it's going to
is.
be, it's going to be Mark Wayne Mullen.
Yeah.
And can I just add, because you're from the South, what kind of a name is Mark Wayne?
So Mark Wayne to me, and I don't know much about this man other than he's a senator from Oklahoma and like very Trumpy and I think has a long military background. A name like Mark Wayne elicits a lot of not the best parts of myself.
Okay.
Which is like the southern bitchy part, which maybe actually is one of the best parts of myself. But there's a lot of class that is tied up in a name like that.
Okay.
Men do not have names that are combined like that unless they are of a certain social class. And so it, to me, designates a sort of lower class, and I don't say this with like judgment or like just I'm speaking sociologically here, and so I think there's a lot of that going on in this. My friend groups actually immediately started commenting on the name as well, and just their sort of none of them are Southerners and their horror at a name like that. But like that's not a name that I went to cotillion with. I'll put it that way.
Okay. All right. Well,
And I
Mark
apologize
Wayne,
for all the awful classness of that, but just sort of
but
looking
why
at
not?
this. Yeah.
Right. So Mark Wayne shows up in my Twitter feed all the time, and I don't really know why I'm on Mark Wayne's radar or why the algorithm has put me on Mark Wayne's radar, but he's far from the worst. I mean, they could have nominated Greg Bovino. There are some who are saying this was a real palace coup, that Stephen Miller has wanted Noam out for a long time, that Susie Wiles hates Corey Lewandowski, and so does Chris LaCivita, because Lewandowski tried to get Trump to fire Wiles and LaCivita during the campaign and did not succeed. It seems like Corey Lewandowski turned out in the end to be Kristi Noem's real Achilles heel, because it didn't seem to matter how incompetent she was, although she was very bad in front of a camera, but that the continual questions about her relationship with Lewandowski, which for reasons that are sort of beyond my understanding, perhaps you get it, Trump was really not happy about this relationship and really not happy about how out in public it was. And the fact that it came up in the hearings and Noam had nothing intelligent to say about it was a huge problem. But apparently, and somebody else said, this $220 million ad campaign, and Meghan McCain keeps posting on X what it cost to make various movies. So she'll say, it cost $70 million to make this entire television show. Where did $220 million go?
Amazing.
And that Noam said, well, Donald Trump signed off on it. And there are those in the White House, unnamed, of course, who are saying that was it, that he did not want to be blamed for that. It was embarrassing. And after that, she had to go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Trump ever wants his name being used as sort of the justification for things that are, being questioned like that. I think like with the affair with the Lewandowski thing, there's a sort of, because in some ways it's like, why would that bother Trump of all people? But like Trump has this like sort of interesting prudishness, even as his own life is ever. And I think, it's an easy explanation of that is just like the like pure hypocrisy of it all. But like, I wonder if there's, and also it's important to say here that she's a woman, right? Like, I think that's really, really relevant here. And I just wonder if it's sort of like, the affair or the possible affair represents a divided loyalty in a way that like Trump just cannot allow. And obviously like her invoking of him, I think it made it for an easy cut for him. And I think the Stephen Miller angle is really interesting as well too.
Yeah, because Stephen Miller is many things. He is an incredibly evil person. He has no morality, but he's not dumb.
Yeah.
So, okay, Neil, so let's shift to our news focus for today, which is the Clintons testified last week before James Comer's House Oversight Committee after months of negotiation that at one point were sort of reaching an impasse that the papers were saying, well, actually, Bill and Hillary could go to jail. The whole point here might be sending them to jail. But in fact, they were able to negotiate testimony. The House Oversight Committee was insisting on having it in private. I think the Clintons wanted it to be public. The House Oversight Committee did, in fact, publish videotapes of the testimony. But here's something interesting. When I was going over them to get a little clip for today's show, they have totally eliminated the questioning from the minority committee members. That has just been clipped out of the videotapes.
Wow.
Right.
I imagine that was not the terms that the Clintons agreed to.
That is correct. Another term that was broken here is that Hillary Clinton said that there were to be no photographs taken in the testimony. Lauren Boebert, who was taking selfies of herself like in the van from Manhattan to Chappaqua and posting them. I mean, what is wrong with these people? Yeah. Anyway, Lauren Boebert took a picture of her, sent it to Benny Johnson, and Benny Johnson posted it on his feed, at which point when Hillary found out, she said, that's it, I'm done. I'm leaving. And they took a half an hour break and Hillary finally came back. That has also been clipped out of the video as far as I can tell. Oh, wow. So they have posted videos, but they are in fact doctored videos. So what's your take? Let's just start with the reason the Clintons were being deposed last week in the Epstein case.
Well, I think a lot of this just has to do with how much the Clintons still loom large in the political imagination of the American right. And I think that's like something we want to talk a lot about today. It's just like, what explains that? How is that the case? Why is that the case that these folks who really have no more political they're off the scene. No one's running for office here again, but why do they animate folks on the right so much? That's there. I think, with Clinton, Bill Clinton himself, sex scandal, Bill Clinton, like these are words that have often been coupled together in American history. So I think it's sort of easy to fire up the imagination again when that's what's sort of in play here. But, this really, I'm not surprised to say, proved to be a real embarrassment to Republicans here for how poorly they handled it and how I think both Clintons sort of wiped the floor in very different ways. I mean, both testimonies played out questionings played out very differently, but I think they both emerged victorious in different ways.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Hillary was alternately annoyed, bored, snapping at people, correcting them on points of the law and so on. Whereas Bill was charming, polite, voluble. But you're right. When Comer and the committee came out of the room at the end of Hillary's testimony, they said, well, we just really don't think she was very forthcoming. And she said over and over again, I don't know anything about Jeffrey Epstein. I was at a couple of social events with him, and then they would sort of question her about Bill. Toward the end of it, they were bringing up Pizzagate. They were bringing up UFOs. What do you know about the UFOs? And she was just like, what is wrong with you? Whereas after Bill's testimony, the committee comes out and said, he was very gracious and he cooperated and so on. So it's Hillary that really draws a tremendous amount of animus, even though it was Bill Clinton's various sex scandals that really drove the conspiracy theories of the 1990s, right?
Yeah, and I think that, I saw so many memes going around with that picture of Hillary sort of sitting with her at the table with her head in her hands, or sort of waiting for the next question, and the sort of the meme, the language around the meme was something along the lines of like, another time a woman has been brought in to answer for the ills, the sins of men. Like what is she even doing there to begin with? Just the pure misogyny of it all, and also in terms of like how both of them are characterized afterwards. You mentioned like these clips being pulled out of Hillary Clinton's testimony in terms of the official record. And I think that's, very troubling. I do not think the Clintons agreed to that. And this was something that was hashed out. So, Republicans not, adhering to the terms they agreed to, and also like altering the record. But like all of those clips are playing, in rotation on social media. So I think it's not for nothing that those things are being sort of pulled out of the official record, but these things live on in other spaces where they may be actually more influential. But yeah, Hillary Clinton, she gets folks blood boiling on the right that like Bill Clinton doesn't. So I think that's a big part of this.
Let me ask you something, Neil, because you may be uniquely positioned on this podcast to address this. Because one of the things that made Hillary a sort of focus for all of the conspiracy theories in the 90s was the idea that she knew about all of Bill's philandering. She knew about the rape of Juanita Broderick, which I guess I should say alleged rape, although I think, given what I've seen, I actually do believe he probably raped her, that she must have known about Monica Lewinsky, and that somehow this all happened on Hillary's watch, and that she is culpable in a different but no less serious way for his sexual transgressions. How does that make sense in, let's say, a religious framework, a conservative framework?
Well, I think so much of their marriage was characterized as a political arrangement, that these were two ambitious political animals who were willing to do anything and everything to win and to gain power, and that part of that was Hillary Clinton, a feminist, right? Looking away and dismissing or even like facilitating Clinton's worst behaviors for her own, political ambition. And so I think that sort of was a way in which religious conservatives sort of attacked both of them and also undermined sort of their marriage and how that played out in sort of political image and sort of the campaign of the time. I mean, remember Hillary Clinton coming out and saying something along the lines of like, I could have been a Tammy Wynette, stand by your man type, but I'm not. And so she was also playing with some sort of interesting cultural images around the time about sort of their marriage and her own involvement in Clinton's activities. But I think, a lot of it was in positioning Hillary Clinton herself as this sort of master schemer, this conniving, power-hungry woman who was willing to do anything in order for her husband to win, because ultimately it was about her own political ambition.
Well, and a lot of these conspiracy theories actually have their root in a whole series that the American Spectator ran, a guy named David Brock, who then inexplicably became a Democrat and recanted everything and so on. But David Brock wrote all of these pieces that were based on anonymous tips from troopers, from various people in the governor's mansion in Arkansas. But the whole conspiracy thing starts in Arkansas. And one of the things I have wondered is whether Hillary's status as an outsider was cemented when she moved from the North to the South, when this woman with an Ivy League education came to Arkansas and thought she could be First Lady.
Yeah, and I remember one thing that was like I think this was in the 92 campaign. Yeah, when they were first sort of coming to the national consciousness, like there was this picture of Hillary reading a book at a University of Arkansas football game, like
Right.
to just sort of epitomize how superior she thought she was to everyone there and how, much of an outsider she was. Yeah, that was very much a big part of this, right? There was she was criticized for having her own career, for being this, successful attorney, and how, she wasn't the sort of going to be the traditional first lady if they won. David Brock, I feel like, is worth saying a little bit more about. I have an entire chapter about him in my recent book about gay Republicans, because he was a closeted gay man while he was doing those hit jobs for the American Spectator. And they were this is really an important moment in the rise of conservative media in the early 90s, which of course was, fueled by an anti-Clinton passion and really benefited from sort of the rise of cable news, but also this sort of proto-internet era and the sort of really gotcha journalism that folks like Brock and others on the right cultivated in this time period. And the Clintons were their number one inspiration, their number one topic. And David Brock was really the architect of that new style of journalism. Journalism isn't the right word, because of course it was more propaganda than journalism, but one that I think in a lot of ways now feels very familiar to us in the social media age that we live in, and sort of like, this fake news hellhole that we sort of are just all drowning in. But in the early 90s, this was revolutionary.
Right. Well, I want to amplify that a little bit, Neil, because you're right. Brock's content and listeners, if you're interested in David Brock, he actually wrote a memoir called Blinded by the Right, in which is a conversion narrative from right to left. And he sort of situates his moment of conversion, of waking up one day and realizing that he can't come out and still be a Republican, which is not actually true. But he can't do what he's doing and have the status he has and still exist in a 1990s Republican Party that is driven by evangelicism. But what you were talking about, that we're now used to the kind of content that Brock and the American Spectator produced. And the American Spectator, like many right-wing rags, was supported by a sort of right-wing Republican businessman. So this is a long tradition on the right, is businessmen investing millions of dollars in these broadsheets. But I have always thought that despite the fact that conspiracism has been a feature, not a bug, of post-World War II conservatism, that the fact that the Clintons come to power as the internet is actually making it possible to spread these rumors, that there are chat rooms, there are we have the invention of the Mosaic browser in 1995, where you can actually, quote unquote, do your own research. So that there's something that becomes possible for the average person to become a chaser of conspiracies in the 90s, and the Clintons are right in the middle of that.
Absolutely. I mean, I would add the Drudge Report to this, right? Because the Drudge Report is just sort of coming into existence in this period, and it, like everything else in this moment that gains an audience, is doing so because of its obsession with Trump. Drudge Report is what, in 1998, when it's been around for a while, but in 1998, after years and years of sort of rabidly covering the Clintons, it's the place where the blockbuster news item of the Lewinsky affair is released. And Matt Drudge also, this has not been as evidenced, and so I don't say it outright, but there's lots of speculation, and people have said that Matt Drudge also is a gay man. And so there's actually a really interesting history between Matt Drudge and David Brock that my chapter in the book gets into. But like, all of this is to say, I think this was a theme that I was particularly interested in, because you had this really interesting arrangement in the early 90s of all these white evangelicals and a handful of gay men who were all obsessed with the Clintons' sexual lives. And I think they are obsessed for different reasons. They're motivated for different reasons here, although maybe there's also some overlap there as well. But the preoccupation with the sexual lives of the Clintons is sort of the thing that drives this content that is just exploding in early 90s conservative media. And I think that there's a connection there between the obsession with the sex lives of the Clintons and their marriage, and also this conspiracism that you talk about that has a long history on the right. Like, I think that those things have sort of connections because, of course, it was so easy to spin a lot of the stories out about the Clintons' marriage into these sort of conspiracist fantasies.
Well, and also Hillary, like Eleanor Roosevelt, who was also a professional, and she didn't have as much education as Hillary, but she moved in very exalted circles of social workers and reformers and so on. Like Eleanor Roosevelt, Hillary Clinton brings a lot of women into government. And a fair number of those women are lesbians.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is this sort of prurient obsession with Hillary's sexuality that, if Bill is running around screwing all of these women, why is that? And is Hillary really at the bottom of it? Has she just cut him off sexually, or is she really interested in women? And there was a lot of talk in the 90s, and I would have to say it was also a moment in which her husband had changed the terrain of politics by surviving a sex scandal to become president, which nobody had done before, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, Clinton kind of sets the stage for Trump's impunity around sex.
Yes, I think that's right. The thing that I think has been gut-wrenching, maybe too strong a term for it, but has been mind-blowing about it for me is the same folks I grew up with. I mean, the adults that sort of raised me, and I'm not talking about my parents, because my parents, as I've talked about on here before a lot, have a real consistency here that I appreciate. But all those people I grew up with in church, all those Sunday school teachers and, all the neighbors who really, I was a teenager when all this stuff with the Clintons was going on. And so in a lot of ways, my moral universe or my morality, my moral reasoning was shaped by this moment and by the things that adults said about this. I remember lots of people around me saying, a man who cheats on his wife will cheat on anyone, and that's why he can't be president, because he would, if he'll turn on his wife, he'll turn on the nation. And that those same folks almost, one to one have become huge backers of Trump has been one of the most, mind-blowing and also just infuriating things for me of the last decade. So maybe that's not what you were teeing up, but I think that it's important when we think about the ways in which Clinton, and I think you're right, that Clinton and the Clintons reshaped so much of American political life by, him talking about his boxers and him having the Lewinsky scandal and all those things sort of that for so long were private being made public. Him doing that brought about a cultural conservatism that was in response to all those things. And that those cultural conservatives are now Trump's biggest allies, is to just sort of say that maybe none of it was about principle, but it was always about power.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. And I want to go back to the 1990s just for a second before we move on, because the Clinton conspiracism then revives itself in the 21st century. But the death of Vince Foster, who was a special counsel in the White House, was an old friend of the Clintons. He had worked with Hillary at a law firm in Little Rock. He commits suicide. And there is this rumor that develops around it that the Clintons must have had him killed. And sometimes that is twinned with the assertion that Hillary and Vince Foster were having an affair. And that's why they had to have him killed. Listeners, I'm sorry to spring this on you. I should have given some kind of a trigger warning for it. But let me just say, it seems that there was nothing nefarious about this, that Vince Foster suffered from depression, that he finally was not willing to fight it anymore. And it was terribly hard on his family to have all of this dragged into the public sphere. So I don't want to gin that up again, but it does begin this sort of search for other people that the Clintons might have killed. And again, I want to come back to this moment on the internet, because it is a moment when blogging is on the rise, in which you have different bloggers, people like me, for crying out loud, although I did not investigate this kind of stuff. But, people sort of coming out of nowhere. Talking Points memo emerges in the 1990s. People coming out of nowhere and investigating things and actually solving crimes on the internet and so on. You could still do that in the 1990s. So this is a moment in which about the Clintons are believable because there are other things happening on the internet that actually are true. Okay, so there is that one thing. Then I want to come back to Monica Lewinsky just for a second, because she has suffered enough. But it is actually a moment in which the assertions that she was taken advantage of. Monica Lewinsky, when she was an intern, I believe was 21 or 22. She was as far as I can tell, a grown-ass adult. Although one who fell hard for somebody she probably should have protected herself from. But there is this moment in which Clinton lies on television. And I remember exactly where I was when he held that press conference. I was sitting in my living room in Middletown, Connecticut. I was teaching at Wesleyan at the time, and I'd come home to watch the press conference, and he gets up and he says, "I did not have sex with that woman, Miss Lewinsky." And I just looked at him and I thought, oh my God, you are lying. I know you're lying, right? And so this puts him in an incredibly vulnerable position, as in fact an investigation is launched that concludes, in fact, that he did have an affair with Lewinsky. He is, I believe, impeached for perjuring himself before Congress. Is that not the case? For perjuring himself in the deposition? So we enter this very muddy period in which Clinton is lying about things, and those lies are uncovered. And that sort of feeds the fire of, well, how could Hillary not have known? How could Hillary not be implicated in this? Right?
Yeah, and I think that, she also, she goes, I believe it was the Today Show, and does that early morning interview and invokes the vast right-wing conspiracy. And if I'm remembering also correctly, she's wearing like a pink suit and her hair is teased out to, just like every Southern Belle pageant, winner, hair should be teased. But there's, a sort of interesting performance of gender and marriage that she's doing there, even as she's invoking this vast right-wing conspiracy. And she wasn't wrong. I mean, we've just sort of detailed this incredible network that emerges, in response to the Clinton presidency of, interconnected media and political institutions on the right that were devoted to taking the Clintons down. And also, Bill Clinton did a lot to facilitate that by his own actions, including, I think, yes, two consensual adults, but what a power disparity there between a president and an intern. And then, the lies about it. And that doesn't mean that any of it should have been under investigation, but it also just sort of underscores that Clinton in many ways shot himself in the foot over and over again, that only sort of aided this huge army of anti-Clinton institutions around him to continue on with their war against him.
Well, and that's part of what makes conspiracy theories so powerful, right, Neil, is that there are elements of truth in the falsehood. Like the narrative arc is false, but the elements of truth along the way cause people to reopen it over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, that's what sort of distinguishes them from just the UFO tabloids, right? Like there's these little points of data that, are true or are, real evidence, and yet how they're constituted, or the sort of chain of events that they're made to be a part of, or the causality that that is given to them, doesn't add up. That's where the conspiracy heads. But they benefit from looking somewhat true or somewhat believable, and that pulls a lot of folks in.
Well, and here's another piece of the conspiracy theory, which is that what Hillary wanted all along was to be president herself.
Right.
And they say, no, that's not where we're going. Although then she runs for Senate, I think in 2000, and she's elected from the state of New York, not a state she has ever lived in up until that point. But Bobby Kennedy did it too, so what the heck? New York seems to be a setup for something like that. She then becomes Secretary of State for Barack Obama when she doesn't get the nomination. She's beat out for the nomination by Obama. But that 2008 campaign is really important because Ron Paul is also running. Okay, Rand Paul's father, Ron, who was a congressman from Texas. And I write about this in the Political Junkies book, that the Ron Paul campaign is a cesspool of conspiracy theories as well, libertarian conspiracy theories. So that then morphs into the Tea Party in 2010, which then begins to focus on Barack Obama as this evildoer, and then brings Donald Trump into the mix. Donald Trump saying, where's the birth certificate? What is our proof that this man is actually an American citizen? So all of a sudden, the conspiracy theories that dogged the Clintons are now enveloping the whole Democratic Party, right?
Yeah. I think it's just sort of next up, right? And this is the sort of Republican line of attack for taking an opponent down. And also because it animates a huge chunk of its base. I mean, because it works. Right. It drives media results, it builds audiences, and it creates like large demographics that show up at the polls. So there's a reason why they keep going back to the well. It's served them. And so I think you sort of see also how the conspiracies shift sort of from gender-oriented to race-oriented. Not shocking given who we're talking about here, but worth sort of pointing out here. The sort of misogyny, then, the pure racism of what is said about Obama. It's interesting. I think they try to do a version of this with Michelle Obama, like a variation of what they've done with Hillary Clinton, but it doesn't seem to get the same traction that it did with Hillary Clinton. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think, a lot of it has to do with how Michelle Obama was just a very different public figure than Hillary Clinton was.
I think that's true. She also then, once Barack starts running, she really ends up subordinating her career to his. And she does a terrific job as First Lady. But I would throw something else into the mix with Michelle Obama, is that the conspiracy theories about her are openly racist, and that there is a certain level in which the increasingly whiter Republican Party knows how unbelievably toxic that is. So the Michelle Obama conspiracy theories sort of operate around the edges of the Republican Party. They don't move to the center the way Hillary's do. But then we also have stuff like Pizzagate. So, let's start with the Seth Ritchie murder. Okay, Seth Ritchie, a DNC staffer, is tragically murdered in Washington, D.C., and Fox News personality Sean Hannity goes on the air in 2016 and says, he was actually killed by members of the Democratic National Committee because he knew things that were not, and what it is that he supposedly knew. Anyway, terrible for the Ritchie family, incredibly painful for them. But Sean Hannity does that, and it is yet another moment that shows how much conservative media has not just liberated itself from reality, but liberated itself from anything that resembles conventional politics.
Yeah, and I just remember a press conference the Ritchie parents had where they basically begged Hannity to stop doing it. I mean, from, and just the pain and torture on their faces as any parents would have of a child, their son having, had his life tragically taken this way. And like, how dare you also take our pain and politicize it in such, fantastical conspiratorial ways. And I think Kennedy continued to do that. It just that's a moment that actually still sticks with me really powerfully because of just how wrenching it was.
Well, and Fox ultimately had to retract the story to settle a lawsuit, and I think they had to pay the Ritchie family. But it also, we can just stick a pin in 2016 as another moment in which conspiracy theories are not just about politics, they're about making money. They're about people tuning in to a major network player that's getting paid to promote not just that, but Pizzagate. In Hillary Clinton's emails, there were all these references to pizza because, of course, political people stay up late at night and they order pizza. There were all of these folks who said, well, actually, when they say pizza, they mean children. And so it was a pedophilia ring. I mean, the irony that at the same time as Jeffrey Epstein is running a real pedophilia ring, that there are all these false accusations against the Clinton campaign and the DNC for, I mean, it's just insane. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to wrap this in a second, Neil, but I just want to say that Donald Trump, for no apparent reason, last May, dredged up an old video from 1994 called The Clinton Chronicles, which is sort of an conspiracy, and I think it was mostly circulated on videotape, that falsely alleged that the Clintons had their political enemies murdered. Why would he do that? He's just won an election. Why did he post that?
I think a lot of people have talked about how Trump seems to be fixated and his historical memory doesn't seem to go past the mid 90s. Something happened in his head that basically made this decade of say the mid 80s to the mid 90s be his sort of lone historical touch point, and also that this is the place where his just sort of head remains. So I think it's partly that these are just really vivid memories for him. Mm-hmm. The Clinton Chronicles was you're right, it was a thing that it was on videotape and it was largely passed around, and it actually circulated mostly through evangelical and through church networks. Right. I remember folks at the church I grew up having copies and passing it off to each other. It sort of traveled that way and was hugely influential in the sort of word of mouth way that it was. But yeah, I mean, I don't think Trump was handed a copy at, First Baptist Manhattan. But why else do you think it might have real resonance for Trump still to this day?
Well, I think the nostalgia factor is really important. Yeah. I guess what I wonder now that the House Oversight Committee made this huge fuss about getting the Clintons to testify about things they already know is that I wonder if many other things, MAGA is running its course and you can't actually have a conspiratorial moment without bringing in the Clintons. It just doesn't count. And that there's a whole audience of people my age and older that believe the Clintons are involved in everything bad. Absolutely. And so if you don't mention the Clintons, if you don't bring the Clintons in to talk about it, then obviously you're not doing your job. So that it's almost a box that has to be ticked on the right at this point. What did the Clintons have to do about it? Because they're obviously all powerful.
Yeah, or put another way, it's like that board with the strings that, and the push pins,
Right.
And they're this every string has to come out of a picture of them to be plugged into the vast conspiracy network that the right participates in. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. I think that's right. Well, I hope we're not going to come back to this moment, but if Hillary Clinton is forced to testify again, then of course we'll revisit it. Neil, what do you want to go viral this week?
Okay, I'm going to try something unprecedented here this week. We'll see how it goes, which is, usually we endorse a book or a TV show or a movie or a podcast or an article. I want to endorse an activity this week, which is spending time on a college campus. Now, I realize a good number of our listeners are academics, and so they're doing that on the regular, but I think a lot of our listeners are not academics, thank goodness. And I just want to endorse the activity of going and spending a day on a college campus. I think it will lift your soul in ways that you might need it to have lifted right now. My husband and I yesterday spent the day with our niece, who is a freshman at the University of Florida, and we've been meaning, all year to get up there and to see her in Gainesville. And so we finally were able to do that yesterday, and we just had the best time,
Aw.
literally walked all over campus by her. She showed us all the spots, all the things. We met her friends. It was a wonderful day. I think a lot of this was obviously shaped by us being really proud uncles and loving her so much. But also, aside from that, I just want to say it was so nice to be on a university campus. As a former academic who only occasionally goes to one, and mostly because I'm doing research in an archive, it was so encouraging to be on this vibrant, diverse, exciting campus, to see it in all its activity. I mean, all the students out on the lawn, with their backpacks, going into the library at noon and seeing it filled with people studying, seeing, kids wearing the school colors and just the school spirit there. I get it. College athletics, lots of problems there. All the caveats are implicit in what I'm saying about the ways we, worry about what's happening on university campuses and what's happening among higher education. But I think there was something really uplifting about feeling the vibrancy, the energy, vitality of a place like a big university campus. We walked by an anti-abortion protest outside the library, but also seeing all the cars with liberal bumper stickers on them. And I think that is good and wonderful and what a university campus should be. And that was, sort of uplifting in its way too. So I don't know. I just think spending time in these places that sort of represent a lot of what's best about America, even as, or maybe especially as, they are under assault by our moment and by this administration. Just for me, it was I felt like my heart swelled a lot yesterday for numerous reasons. And a lot of it just had to do with how much we love our niece, but also just I think there's something beautiful and powerful and special about university campuses. And I think all of us should sort of try and experience that more often if we can.
Yeah, there's a phrase out there on the internet, go out and touch grass. And
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of experience you're talking about. And I also just want to underline something you're saying is, when we read about higher education in the news, we read a lot of bad things. We read a lot of anxious things. We read about how everything's changed and nobody's any good anymore. And faculty are at 6s and 7s. And actually, most people on college campuses are just living their lives.
Completely.
And kids are excited about school and they're excited about education. I spend a fair amount of time at the UMass Amherst campus, and UMass, as it has redone its buildings, has made a big effort to create all these little nooks with chairs and couches and places for students to gather and so on. And I remember the first time I visited my office there, I called Nancy outside and I was like, Nancy, there are kids sitting in chairs reading.
I know.
And, books. They're reading books.
Know. Yeah.
And, and so I heartily endorse your endorsement, Neil. And we're all looking for things to be cheerful about now.
Yeah. I'm updating the go out and touch grass with go out and touch a college quad.
Yeah. There you go.
Whatever it's got. Yeah.
There you go. Well, I'm going to end with weird capitalism. What I would like our listeners to do is read an article by Ellen Cushing in The Atlantic called The McDonald's CEO's Big Burger Eating Mistake. And apparently McDonald's has introduced a new kind of burger called the Arch, which is sort of like the anti-Maha burger, as far as I can tell. It's huge. It's stuffed with dressing and multiple patties and cheese and so on and so forth. And the CEO, who's a guy named Chris Kepczynski, who calls himself Chris K in the Instagram video, created this Instagram video where he eats the Arch. And it is instantly apparent as you watch him that this is not a man who eats fast food at all. And he sort of picks it up and looks at it sort of suspiciously and takes a little nibble at it and talks about it and puts it down. And food influencers have gone nuts over this, saying, how could you possibly be the CEO of McDonald's if you don't actually eat McDonald's and you don't even seem to like it? And I think there's sort of two things that I think is interesting about it. One is how at odds our world is between a genuine desire I think many people have to be healthy and how delicious fast food is. I'm just going to say it. I eat McDonald's sometimes when I'm on the road and I stop. That is my opportunity. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so there is this real divide between we all know we shouldn't eat it, and yet when we do, it makes us so happy. And this CEO is not happy eating his own food, right? And so there is this sort of like suggestion that what is this capitalist doing, selling something he doesn't like? You know, either he shouldn't be in that position or there's something wrong with the product. But I think the other one is the rise of food influencing and influencing in general, Instagram, in which the entire point is to be authentic. And that when you put something up that is not authentic, it's not just that it doesn't work, it has a rebound effect and it affects your reputation completely. So this is a short article, the McDonald's CEO's big burger eating mistake. Take a look at it, listeners, and see what you think. And if it creates a craving to go out and eat some McDonald's, God bless you. Neil, I think that's it for this week.
I'm craving fries now. McDonald's French fries, the best.
I know, and a chocolate shake. All right, we're running out now. Yeah, all right. And I'll see you next week, Neil.
All right, see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye. And that's it for today's show. Thanks for hanging out with us. Share this podcast with a friend who loves history, politics, and smart conversation. You can follow Neil and me on Threads, Blue Sky, X, TikTok, and Instagram. Go to the Political Junkie Substack at clairepotter.substack.com for show notes, more episodes, to leave a comment or question, to subscribe for free, or to support our work for as little as $5 a month. You can also subscribe for free by searching for us on your favorite platform. If you do, please leave a rating and a comment so that other listeners can find us. Our podcast is supported by the New School for Social Research and by paying subscribers. Political Junkie is written, recorded, edited, and produced by me, Claire Potter. Today's theme is Heresy by Wicked Cinema. You can find their work and all the talented artists we feature on these episodes on Soundstripe. That's all for now. See you next week.